My son stared at the family photo wall and asked, "Why aren't we in any of the pictures?" My mom smiled and answered, "We only hang photos of the core family. There were 19 frames, none of us." I replied, "Then let the core family cover their own bills." My mom began screaming. My boy stared at the wall of family photos and asked me why we weren't in any of them, and my mom just smiled and said they only hung up pictures of the core family, even though there were 19 frames up there and not a single one showed me my wife or my kid. So I calmly told her that maybe the core family could start covering their own bills, which is when she completely lost it. The moment my son asked why his face wasn't anywhere on that wall, I already had a bad feeling because I knew exactly where this was headed. We were standing in my parents' hallway, surrounded by 19 heavy frames in gold and shiny silver, each one looking like some kind of trophy for a version of our family that honestly doesn't exist anymore. My kid pointed at one photo, a Christmas picture of my sister Kelly from a couple of years back, and asked again why we weren't in any of them. Before I could even open my mouth, my mom Linda walked out of the kitchen holding a tray of cookies, acting like everything was perfectly normal, and without skipping a beat she said they only put up the core family. No pause, no awkwardness, like that sentence had never hurt anyone in her life. My son blinked, looked at me, then back at the wall, and I felt this cold weight settle in my chest, not because I was shocked since this kind of thing wasn't new, but because hearing it said out loud made it painfully clear how little we really mattered to her. I stood there trying to let it slide, telling myself to swallow it like always, but I couldn't, so I said real calm and steady, "Then the core family can handle their own bills." I didn't yell, I didn't need to, because that one line cracked through the room like breaking glass and everything froze for a second. Linda's face changed completely as she slowly turned toward me, disbelief written all over her, her fake smile disappearing in an instant, and she didn't even ask what I meant because she already knew. She just started screaming. She went on about how I was always dramatic, how I always made everything about myself, how I was humiliating her in front of my own child, pulling out every guilt-soaked insult she's been throwing at me since I was 12, calling me ungrateful, bitter, divisive, and of course jealous of Kelly because that accusation always makes its way in. I didn't argue, I barely moved, I just kept staring at those stupid pictures on the wall, while my wife quietly took our son outside, knowing better than anyone when to clear the blast zone. I stayed put, listening to my mom's voice bounce off those framed reminders of who she actually considers family, until my dad Ron walked in from the garage, probably holding one of those craft beers he pretends he's an expert on, and asked what was happening like he couldn't hear her yelling from a mile away. I explained exactly what happened step by step, and he did what he always does by trying to smooth things over without ever addressing the real problem, telling me it wasn't about that and not to take it personally because Linda didn't mean it that way. So I asked him one simple question: if it wasn't personal, then where was our picture? Where was the photo from our wedding? Where was the one from my son's first birthday when he was standing right there smiling? And Ron didn't answer. He just looked away and muttered something about not wanting to get involved in women's drama, which is when I realized I was wasting my breath. I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back, and we didn't even stay long enough for dinner. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but that moment was just the first spark tossed into dry grass, because the real fire hadn't even started yet. The next day my phone wouldn't stop lighting up with missed calls from Linda, then Ron, then Kelly, followed by voicemail after voicemail, all saying the same thing in different ways, asking how I could do this, why I would say something like that, and how dare I act like I wasn't part of the family, even though they only remember I exist when something breaks, the AC dies, the roof leaks, or the property taxes jump and suddenly the core family needs help keeping their house afloat. For the first time in my life I didn't answer, and by the third voicemail I stopped listening altogether because it was all the same song on repeat, Linda crying about how I was tearing the family apart, Ron asking me to be reasonable, and then Kelly, who never calls unless she's delivering a message for our parents, sending her usual calm but poisonous text saying that if I was going to make everything about money again, maybe I shouldn't come around anymore, as if I really had been, as if I hadn't already wired money 3 separate times that year for their so-called emergencies, paid for the plumber last spring, covered the insurance deductible after the hailstorm, and sent $1,000 for Kelly's youngest when he needed dental surgery, but somehow I was still the one obsessed with money. So I went completely silent for 2 weeks, and right on schedule a group text popped up in the family chat from Linda, announcing Thanksgiving dinner at their house at 5, saying we're all adults and should put this behind us. My wife asked me if I wanted to go and I said yes, not because I wanted to smooth anything over, but because I wanted to see how far they'd push it once pretending wasn't an option anymore. We arrived 20 minutes late, And Kelly gave me that tight, rehearsed smile from across the table, the one she uses to show everyone she's above the drama unless she's the one stirring it. Linda didn't even look at me at first, she just set a plate down in front of me like that alone proved she was being the bigger person, and nobody said a word about what had happened, so I brought it up myself. I asked if they'd actually thought about the photo wall, about the way they treat me and my son like background noise, and about how I somehow became their emergency backup plan every time something broke or a bill came due. Linda stared at me like I was speaking another language. Ron let out a tired sigh and told me not to make a scene, and Kelly took a slow sip of her wine before saying maybe I should think about how this was making Mom feel, and that she didn't mean anything by it. I laughed, looked around the table at all those polite, dishonest faces, and told them I was done funding this, and the silence that followed was so thick you could feel it. Linda carefully set her fork down and folded her napkin, which is always the signal that she's about to perform, and she started speaking softly, sounding disappointed, like I just failed the final exam on how to be a good son. That's when it really blew up, with my mom throwing out that familiar line about everything they've supposedly done for me and all the help they gave when I moved back from California, which somehow always circles back to that one time 12 years ago when they paid for a U-Haul like it was some lifelong sacrifice I could never repay. Then my dad Ron stepped in, playing neutral like he always does, never raising his voice, just slipping in those quiet, cutting comments about how I've changed and how money seems to have gone to my head, like that was supposed to sting less because he said it calmly. And right on cue my sister Kelly jumped in with her usual tone, saying it must be exhausting walking around thinking everyone is out to take advantage of me, and that was it for me. That was the point where I stopped holding back. I told them no one thinks you're using me, you are using me, and I've paid for more things in this house than any of you ever want to admit, and I'm done pretending I'm not the backup wallet you all reach for whenever the core family hits a bump in the road. Linda shot up from her chair so fast it screeched across the floor and made the kids sitting at the other table jump, and she started yelling that I was cruel and ungrateful and that if I couldn't support the family then I didn't deserve to be part of it, and she looked me dead in the face and said if you walk out that door, don't expect anything from us ever again. I stood up too, met her stare and said perfect, that's finally something we both agree on, and then I walked out, not even staying long enough for dessert. But that still wasn't the end of it, not even close. The very next morning it started with texts, then missed calls, then Ron calling my husband directly for some so-called man-to-man talk, which he'd never done before, while Linda left me 6 voicemails in a single day and Kelly started tagging me in old Facebook photos like we were still one big happy family. But this time I wasn't playing along because they'd pushed too far, and they were about to learn what happens when I stop paying for the illusion. It didn't even take a full week before the first crack showed, and I was at work when it happened, seeing a long, overly formal email from Ron pop up, which immediately told me something was wrong because he only writes emails when it's something serious like complaining to customer service or trying to get approved for a loan. The subject line said "Let's be rational," which honestly made me laugh, and inside was a PDF attachment showing a roof repair estimate for $6,842, along with a neatly worded paragraph explaining how insurance wasn't covering the full cost, written like a business pitch, not a single mention of Thanksgiving, not one word about my son Noah, the photo wall, or the way they screamed at me, just a line about how they wouldn't normally ask but this was about the house and it wasn't personal, even though with them it's always personal, they just hate when you say it out loud. I didn't reply, and 2 days later a GoFundMe appeared, created by Kelly, not sent to me directly but posted publicly, with a photo of my parents standing in front of their house that I'd actually taken 3 years earlier when I was over there helping them fix the fence. The caption talked about helping our parents through a rough patch and showing them they weren't alone, and as I scrolled I saw all the usual lines about how much they'd sacrificed and how they never asked for help but now they needed it. And then the part that really said everything, the line about how they were doing everything they could but unfortunately not all family members had stepped up and some had chosen distance over love, and I didn't need a name spelled out to know exactly who that was aimed at. What really surprised me was seeing cousins donating, neighbors, people who had no idea what was really going on, and in the comments a woman from their church wrote that she didn't understand why their other child couldn't help like she used to and hoped I'd come around, and that's when it hit me that this wasn't just about money anymore, it was about painting me as the villain. Then it crossed another line when Noah came home from school a couple days later and asked if his grandma and grandpa were mad at him, and when I asked why he thought that, he said a classmate mentioned something about his grandma being sad because her child was mean, and he wasn't even sure who said it, maybe one of the moms at pickup, which told me they were dragging this mess into places it never should have gone. That night I finally broke and sent one short text to Linda, telling her Noah's winter recital was on the 15th and she was welcome to come as long as she kept it about him, and she didn't answer. But less than an hour later, Kelly sent a long message full of emotion and no logic, accusing me of turning my back on them, punishing the people who raised me, saying money didn't make me better than them, and that they only asked because they trusted me. And then she added the line that stuck with me, telling me I might think I was in control now, but if I kept pushing I'd regret what came next, and that wasn't guilt talking, that was a threat. I didn't respond. Instead, I started quietly cutting ties, shutting down every automatic payment tied to their names, utilities, streaming services, those temporary loans that were never repaid, pulling out of the shared Costco membership, canceling the AAA family plan, and removing myself as an emergency contact at their doctor's office, and they noticed almost immediately. 3 days later, Ron tried to access an old joint account we'd opened years ago when they were refinancing their car, back when I'd agreed to co-sign because their credit was a mess. And even though I hadn't touched it in years, the bank flagged the attempt and called me, and I closed the account within the hour. That night the calls started again from unknown and blocked numbers, followed by a text from a number I didn't recognize saying I'd made my point and now I was just being vindictive, unsigned but unmistakable. Then came the predictable social media posts, Linda sharing a Bible verse about hard-hearted children, Kelly posting a picture of their Christmas tree with a caption about how some people would rather hold grudges than hold family close, and tagging me in it for everyone to see, and I didn't react publicly because I refused to play that game, but inside I was done pretending. They wanted to make this ugly, and that was fine because they had no idea who they were dealing with once I stopped being the quiet kid who always bailed them out, and by Christmas they weren't even pretending anymore. The GoFundMe never came down. Instead they added a second goal because of what they called overwhelming support, and then they posted an update thanking everyone who had stepped up for the family during such a hard time, ending it with a line about how some people chose to walk away from their responsibilities while others showed what real family looks like. Along with that message they shared a group photo taken at Kelly's house, and everyone was in it: my parents, Kelly, her kids, even a few distant cousins who only ever show up for free food and gossip, all of them smiling like nothing bad had ever happened, and I wasn't there, not invited, not even told they were all in town. What stopped me cold though was seeing my ex-husband Mark in the picture, and I stared at it for a long minute before it really sank in that it was him, standing next to Kelly with a glass of wine, half smiling like he belonged, like he hadn't disappeared 3 years earlier after dodging child support and showing up to our custody hearing an hour late and high. I texted him asking if he was seriously spending the holidays with my family now, and he never replied. Instead, the next day I got a call from Noah's school, with the front office telling me his emergency contact list had been updated and asking if I'd added his grandfather as an approved pickup, and I told them absolutely not. That's when they explained someone had called pretending to be me, using my full name, my phone number, my address, all of it, and asked them to add both of my parents as emergency contacts for my son, and they almost did until one staff member recognized my voice from past calls and decided to double-check. I drove straight to the school and fixed it myself, and afterward I sent Ron a single text, no greeting, no softening it, telling him if he ever tried to get my son behind my back again I would file a restraining order, and he never answered. That same night Kelly posted a throwback photo of her holding Noah as a baby with the caption "Blood is thicker than bitterness," and then everything went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. That's when the email from HR hit while I was sitting at my desk trying to close out the last week of the quarter, asking me to come to the conference room because they'd received a complaint about a conflict of interest and financial misconduct, and my stomach dropped because I knew exactly who had done it. The accusation itself was sloppy and anonymous, claiming I'd been funneling family money through work accounts and using company resources for personal gain, and they even attached screenshots of my Venmo history that were cropped and stripped of context, showing donations and payments I'd sent my parents over the years and twisting it into something it wasn't. I explained everything, showed receipts, emails, tax records, all of it, and while it was obviously false it still shook me, not because I'd done anything wrong but because they were willing to go that far. Afterward my boss quietly told me the company had dismissed the complaint, but then she added that I might want to tighten my circle because whoever sent it knew a lot about me, and I already knew who it was. That night I pulled out every legal document I owned, custody papers, old banking records, everything, backed it all up, sent copies to my lawyer, and told him to keep them on file. Then I called a locksmith and had the locks on our house changed twice with different brands, and I didn't sleep at all because this wasn't about money or pride anymore, it was war. I used to think cutting someone off meant pulling back and waiting for things to cool down, but what I learned is when you're the family's main power source, the one who pays, fixes, rescues, they don't let go quietly, they claw and scramble and start fires just to pull you back under control, and when that fails they try to destroy you. After the stunt with HR and the fake emergency contact change at my son's school, I stopped being afraid and stopped waiting for the next move, cleared my schedule, and started cutting every cord they'd ever wrapped around me. First, I met with my lawyer and had formal cease and desist letters drafted for Linda, Ron, and Kelly, all documented, certified, and delivered, spelling out no more contact, no third parties, no surprise visits, no hiding behind vague social media posts or fake accounts, and making it clear that anything further would be treated as harassment and handled legally. Then I cleaned house for real by changing banks, closing shared accounts, canceling cards I'd once given them access to, digging up old passwords and shutting down accounts I'd forgotten even existed, and I updated my will, removing every single one of them from every line and clause. I met with Noah's school principal in person and had their names formally blacklisted from any future contact or pickup authorization, showed proof, and made it clear I wasn't playing anymore. 3 days later, messages started coming in from unknown numbers asking if I was really going to do this to my own mother, reminding me who raised me, some of them outright insulting, and then an aunt I hadn't heard from in nearly 10 years suddenly called saying she was heartbroken by what she'd heard and just wanted to understand, and I didn't answer. An hour later, Kelly posted screenshots of fake text messages I supposedly sent, filled with words I'd never used and written in a voice that wasn't even mine. Caption was something about how people like to pretend they're victims when they're really just mad they can't manipulate you anymore. And I didn't react publicly, didn't confront her, didn't respond. I just took screenshots, added them to the growing legal file, and kept moving forward. The next morning, Kelly's freelance contract was terminated. I didn't report Kelly, not even once, because it turns out someone else did it for me, one of her clients who saw what she'd been posting and decided they didn't want their name anywhere near it. Apparently she'd been telling my story to people, using my name for sympathy, saying I'd abandoned the family and that I was emotionally unstable, and that client went looking for me online and sent me an email with the subject line, "I thought you should know what she's saying." That's when it stopped feeling petty and started feeling dangerous. That same week I found out my parents had gone to an old family friend of ours, someone I'd stayed close with over the years, and tried to warn her about me, telling her I was spiraling, that I was being vindictive, making things up, and trying to turn people against them. But she didn't buy a word of it and called me right after to say she'd never seen two people so desperate to protect their image. And that was the moment something really clicked for me. They were losing control and they knew it, and the less I reacted, the more frantic they became. They tried reaching me through my husband, through my son's teacher, through a mutual friend from high school I hadn't spoken to in years, and every time it was the same script about wanting peace, about me overreacting, about them being worried about me. But peace was never what they wanted, control was, and it was slipping fast. So I finished what I'd started. I removed myself from a shared storage unit I didn't even realize I'd been paying for, closed an old savings account my dad had opened years ago for so-called emergencies, and even had a lawyer check the deed on their house because they once convinced me to co-sign a renovation loan and I needed to be sure my name hadn't been twisted into something else, and while it hadn't, I made damn sure it never could be again. Then I sent one last message, not to them but to myself, wrote it down, printed it out, and taped it inside my closet door where I'd see it every day. You don't owe them peace, you owe your son protection, you owe yourself freedom. I haven't spoken to them since, not a call, not a text, not a single word. Noah doesn't ask about them anymore, and I think he felt the change before I fully did because kids always know. My husband's been quieter lately too, not because anything's wrong but because for the first time our house is quiet in the way it's supposed to be. Not tense or waiting for the next explosion, just calm. They were sure I'd come back, that I'd panic once they pulled out the sympathy routine, that I'd crumble under the weight of being labeled the ungrateful daughter. But the truth is I've never felt more steady. At first the silence felt strange, not peaceful, just unfamiliar, like when the power comes back on after an outage and everything feels off for a bit. And that first week I kept checking my phone out of habit, expecting another guilt-soaked voicemail or some cousin reaching out on their behalf, but nothing came, no calls, no messages, no passive-aggressive posts hinting at my name. I thought the quiet would feel cold and that I'd regret it, but instead I started noticing how still our mornings were, no tension hanging in the air, no rehearsing responses to fake emergencies, no wondering if today would be the day my mom twisted something innocent into a crisis, and I realized the noise had always been there and I just hadn't understood how loud it was until it stopped. One afternoon while folding laundry I caught myself humming, and it startled me because I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that just because I felt okay. Noah noticed the difference even sooner than I did. He stopped asking why Grandma didn't call, stopped mentioning her at all, stopped waking up from dreams where someone was yelling, And he seemed lighter, not hyper or wild, just comfortable in a way he hadn't been before. He started drawing pictures of just the three of us, me, him, and my husband, no extra faces, no forced smiles, and one night while getting ready for bed he asked me if families can change, and when I said yes he asked if it was okay to have a small one, and I told him it's better to have a small family that loves you than a big one that hurts you, and he nodded like it made perfect sense before asking if we could get pancakes in the morning, and that was all he needed, and that's when I knew I'd done the right thing. I started filling my days with things that weren't about fixing other people's messes, reconnected with an old friend I drifted away from years ago because my family didn't approve of her. And when we met for lunch she hugged me like no time had passed and didn't push for answers I wasn't ready to give. I got a promotion at work too, quiet and simple, no announcement, no photo, just a new title, better pay, and recognition from people who actually respect me. And my boss told me I seemed sharper lately, like something heavy had finally been lifted off my back, and he wasn't wrong. My husband's changed too, more relaxed, and even though he never said it outright, I know how hard it was for him watching me get torn apart by people who claimed they loved me. And now he doesn't tense up when my phone rings or hover when I check the mail because we both know it won't be them. A few weeks ago Kelly tried one last time, sending a message through a mutual friend saying she wanted to clear the air and be civil for the kids, and I stared at it for a long moment before blocking the friend, not out of anger but clarity because there was nothing left to clear. I'm not angry anymore, I don't walk around with that tight knot in my chest, I'm not trying to make them understand, I've let it go in the real way, the kind where you stop checking the door because you finally locked it for good. I don't wonder if they talk about me, I know they do and it doesn't matter, because they lost access to my life and more importantly they lost the version of me that needed their approval. There's no family photo wall in my house, but if there were it would only have 3 pictures on it, just us, no extras and no empty spaces saved for people who only show up to take. They chose who their core family was and I finally chose mine too, and this time I didn't leave the door cracked open. These days when I think about family I don't think about blood, I think about safety, about who shows up when nothing is owed, about who protects your peace instead of punishing you for it, and for the first time I don't feel guilty for wanting that, I feel free.